It is July 28th, 2015, and this is Daryl Ehrlich with Jimmie Kerr. Jimmie, you're from Billings, correct?
I grew up in Laurel.
You grew up in Laurel.
Yep.
What class were you in Laurel?
1966.
1966.
Right.
Wow. So tell me, let's just start at the beginning, and like all, you can answer any of these questions, or you don't have to answer them. It's up to you. And we're going to just take the interview where it goes, and it's being preserved both on film and recording as well. So
Fine.
Jimmie, let's talk about why. Now, you enlisted, correct? Did you enlist?
Yes, I am.
I remember you telling me that. Tell me a little bit of why you enlisted and what year that was.
The most important part was that my father and uncles all served World War II. They all served in the military, and their philosophy was do your part for your country and then come back and start your careers. And I kind of followed that. So I entered the Navy in 1966 for a 4-year enlistment at that time.
Why Navy?
Because my dad was in the Navy. And he was on a destroyer and also PT boats.
Yeah. What when you went into the Navy, did you think, I mean, we don't necessarily think of Vietnam as a naval war, unlike some of the great Navy battles in World War II. Did you think that was going to be, I don't want to say safer, was it different? Did you think that you might not see the action, or was that an equal concern in 66?
I was assigned to an aircraft carrier, so they flew planes off of that. And I was started out as what they call an aviation storekeeper. I took care of airplane parts to keep them flying. I went from there. I got injured on board, and I spent several months in the hospital. Then I went to Hawaii and spent a year, and I wanted to get my brother out of Vietnam. So they took volunteers for these boats. And after you got into it, you understood why they just wanted volunteers. But I was hoping to get my brother out if I went. So I had to change my ratings and everything to become, I was a boatswain mate, coxswain. So that's how I got started and headed for Vietnam in that particular instance.
Why? It may sound like I hope you don't mean this to be a dumb question, but why get your brother out?
He had been there and been wounded, and I was wondering how many times he had to be wounded before they let him go home. And I thought, well, if I could go over there, then they wouldn't keep 2 of us there. They would send 1 of us home. Well, then he refused to leave, so we were both sitting there. So,
was he Navy as well, or was he?
No, he was in Army, 4th Infantry in Pleiku, working with the mountain yards.
Wow.
So
all of a sudden you say, I'm going to do this for my brother, and you find yourself on a riverboat. Let's just talk about what was that like? What did that job entail?
Well, you got to remember we were young, so you don't think of consequences. You know, that's why they like us to join the service. It was exciting to me because my dad had served on PT boats, and here was an elite group that made the young man feel, well, hey, I want to be part of that. After I went through my training, then I was wondering what I really got into.
What about your training made you wonder that?
Well, we went through the same training as pilots do, that they have to go through prisoner war camps and all that kind of stuff, and how to run the boats, all of the weaponry that we used. You had to know how to use that, how to run the boats, how to keep the engines running. You know, that was just part of the job. Everybody did everything. We'd have 5 to 7 crew members on a boat. We would haul Army soldiers to wherever they wanted them inserted. We'd work with them in operations, trying to catch the enemy coming across the rivers of supplies and so on. I have to say, the training made you feel like you were tougher than anything on earth, and that's the way they want you to be.
Right.
Have that.
So there was an invincibility feeling?
Yes. after the training, after the initial, this is combat, because anybody that says they weren't scared sometime or another, I wonder about. But yeah, you knew what fear was, but then you got hard towards it.
So how do you one thing is to make you tough. From a guy, and I didn't serve, how do they instill how to be afraid, or I mean how to do it without panicking? I mean, how do they prepare you for? It's one thing to practice; it's another thing when that fire is live.
Well, I think I look back on it, and the training they provided, you do it automatically without thinking, because you don't have a lot of time to think when you get into a firefight, which is called. When we grew up as kids, we watched war movies, and they were all organized. Everything went the way it's supposed to go, and it was total terror. You were trying to protect yourself and your buddies, and you just did what had to be done.
Right.
And you did a lot of it without thinking because of the training that we got.
So a day, let's go back to those when you're on these boats. They're small, 5 to 7 crew member. And then how many people would it carry at one time?
Oh, I can't remember how many soldiers. I'd have to look in that book.
Sure.
I get Alzheimer's, I think.
Right. Yeah.
The troops, the carrier, your old landing craft you saw in World War II.
Yep.
They fixed those up to go down the rivers to haul to the soldiers. The Alpha boats, which I brought that book for you to look at, it shows, they call that the tin can, or the cruisers of the river. They only had 5 on it, but they drug for mines, and they led groups in, so you could drop them off, the soldiers off, and they can start their operation. And we'd a lot of times go down the river, and they would make sweeps towards us, and then we'd try to catch.
So an average mission, or an average would be going up, and they would go ahead, and then you'd be taking the troops with you?
Yes.
Okay. What was that? How long were these missions? How was it? Was it days long? Was it hours? Was it minutes? How long was getting to some of these places?
Oh, you go out a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Okay.
And a lot of times we didn't have troops, especially I switched from being on American boats to being an advisor on Vietnamese boats. So our job was to train them, and that was a unique experience.
Why? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, you get to thinking about it. I think about our Native Americans. A lot of the beliefs from the Vietnamese were that there is a happy hunting ground after you die. The war was gruesome in that they thought that to get to the happy hunting ground, you had to have all your parts. So you saw gross things, cutting heads off, stuff like that. Well, they did that so the enemy could not go to the happy hunting ground and haunt them there. So there's a logic behind their thoughts with some of the stuff that happens. Is the same as happenings overseas right now, the religion related.
That had to be a pretty sobering thought from a guy who grew up in Laurel, Montana, where beheading or missing a body part is just not something you would have seen.
Yes, it was a shock, and it changes you. And people that don't understand, when a soldier comes home, he is going to be different no matter what. You might think he's the same guy, but he isn't.
Right.
Because you kind of try to bury it and move on with your life if you can. So.
Sure. Tell me about, it's one thing for a guy like me who grew up, we just exited Vietnam when I was born, so I didn't see it. But, you see pictures on movies or TV, and you think, what do you remember just about your surroundings and what Vietnam was like?
Parts of Vietnam were beautiful. Going down the rivers, you'll see on one side of the bank where there's bomb craters, or on the other side it's all green with rice fields. It was hot, muggy, snakes, insects, and I would have to say that a lot of your time it was just pure boredom and misery because of the country we're in, with all those items, the rain, the mosquitoes, and so on. And then once in a while come along a firefight, and everything would be pretty exciting.
Right.
But it was always a wait and see.
Right.
And the same with the soldiers going through the jungle. It's always, well, where are they? Where are they? When are they going to come out? And it starts all over.
Right. I
got to work with the people when I was an advisor, and I got closer to Vietnamese than a regular soldier. Most of them don't have much use for them because they didn't really work with them. You learned who their families were, what they did, what their religions were, and you worked with them. I had a boat captain that was from China that lived in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese and Chinese have always been enemies.
Right.
But here I had a Chinese boat captain on one of the boats that I was helping run. So,
did that give you a different perspective, do you think, than most people in the war who served?
Yes. I helped a baby be born. We helped when we invaded Cambodia. I was with that invasion. We hauled troops up and hauled people back to Vietnam, and that you learn about the real people, and that they're like everyone. They got their con men, they got people that take advantage, but you look at them, they'd been in war all their lives, some of those guys. They'd never known a peace, so they wouldn't be in a big hurry to go do something. They figured, oh, the war's going to be here tomorrow too. So Americans, let's go. We got a date, a time, and let's get with it.
Right.
So you had to kind of pinch yourself and say, okay, now wait a minute, you're in a little bit different atmosphere here, and work with it and learn to work with people.
Right, right. Looking back, does that now having those experiences and now having some time on the war, does it change how you view it?
The war part, I never quite figured it out because of politics. Mm-hmm. After I became an advisor, we were supposed to be turning over all our weapons and boats and that to the Vietnamese and providing training and so on. And there was numerous times when we didn't even have enough ammunition because I find out back here people laying in front of ammunition trains so they can't get out to us. I think the people, yes, they got tired of the war, but they forgot that we were real and we were from America. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the hardest thing, is that we were just a number, and we all know we are when we go in the military, but we didn't think the public in general would think that's all we are, is a number. They didn't want to know about us. They stuck their head in the sand. And that was a tough to take, even when they told us when we were coming home to wear civilian clothes, don't wear a uniform because of the demonstrations at the airport and that. And I didn't know a lot of them that wore their civilian clothes. They wore their uniforms. And
did you wear your uniform or your civilian clothes?
All the way home.
Okay. What was your reception back? Did you come home to Billings, to Laurel, to Yellowstone County?
Yeah, yeah.
What was the reception like when you came home to Yellowstone County?
Well, Denver was bad because we always got delayed there because there was never a plane coming into Billings. So
right.
They were groups of you that would give the soldiers and sailors a bad time. And Yellowstone, they ignored you. You're just a person, and they just ignored you. And that, always thought of Montana being Western, that they'd be patriotic, they would support, but there was a different attitude in those days than.
Yeah. Do you think that, what was that like? That must have been hard. So you went, you talked about some of the things you saw. You enlisted to even try to get your brother out. There was a lot of sacrifice there. And then to come home and at least it may not have been overt hostility, but people weren't exactly proud, or like there weren't parades in your honor. How did that sit with you at the time?
Well, I believe that's why Vietnam veterans, a lot of them are loners, because they didn't know where to go. They didn't have anybody that would talk with them. They labeled us that we're all druggies. And, the majority of them done their job. And just like every war, World War I and II had drug problems.
Right.
So that was the difference. The thing that shocked me the most was my own classmates that I were in the school. They felt I changed, and they kind of treated you different. So you just didn't say anything and went on down. Now, I was fortunate enough to have a lieutenant that was a psychologist, sociologist, and before I left, he says, you get a chance to talk about this stuff, you do it.
Right.
And I think that helped me.
Did you do that right away, or did it take some time?
It took some time, mostly talking with my brother and my own mother, because she had her brothers in World War II, and then my dad, and other veterans getting together, talking about things that happened and that, trying to figure out how to heal from it. And they say time heals everything. Well, it does to a point, but it's there, and it can be brought back up with just something funny happening, and it comes back to your mind.
Yeah. What's the hardest thing for you about kind of, I guess, healing, if that's or moving on? Because you said you don't really ever move completely on, but what's the hardest thing for you?
I think often about the Vietnamese that I worked with, what happened to them. I felt like America just dropped them and gone, left them holding the bag, or we didn't finish. Kind of like Korea, we didn't finish, and that's what we all got hit on the head. You didn't win a war. Even some of the organizations wouldn't accept us. You weren't in a war. You were in a police action. Well, those bullets go flying over your head. I don't care if it's a war or police action, it's the same. So
yeah, the bullets are still deadly.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the one of the things that you said that I think is interesting, because I've in those who I've interviewed, especially from Vietnam, have described it somewhat similarly to you when they said it's boredom punctuated by fear. Mm-hmm. So how did you cope with the boredom? Because I think people have this idea that war is just nonstop, action comics, when really the majority of it is how to do that. So how did you combat that?
Well, I often thought about watching old war movies. There was always something goofy, funny that would happen. A guy pulled a pin out of a grenade, or, something crazy like that. There was humor. The funny things that happened that could have been life-threatening, but it was just funny. The humor you had between each other. Talking the new guy in that comes in, hey, it's time to go out and take care of before you go to the bathroom.
Right.
And he gets stuck with it.
Right.
And you laugh about it. You pour kerosene or diesel fuel into a big 50-gallon tank and pour that in and light it. You got to sit there and wait until it burns down. And
right.
So things that were funny like that, funny things that happen with weapons that really shouldn't have been funny, but they were.
Kind of gallows humor?
So, yeah. So, yeah.
What's the, when was it often, or did you ever have a time when you said, I may not see Billings or Laurel or Yellowstone County or home again?
Yes, there was a couple times, especially in the beginning. You got kind of hard and finally accepted the fear part, where the way I looked at it, if it was my turn to go, then I was going to go whether I was there or here.
Okay.
And I kind of used that concept and finally was accepted. And then the idea that I'm tougher than anybody walking down the street bolstered that, and that's how you coped with it. Hey, here I got friends that I've made here. We're buddies. We're close. And we watch out for each other and took care of each other. And that's how you coped with it. At least that's how I coped with it.
Mm-hmm. Did you, Did you find that hard to? So you're out, you're fighting. You don't know when someone's going to shoot at you. It's hot, it's sticky, and then you're back in the United States. How does that work for reintegration? Because it seems to me that's quite a shock.
It's a big change to what you're used to. You're always observant. Noises always get you, and to this day they do.
Give me an example.
Well, if I hear a helicopter go over, I hear it right now, and I think about what's going on. Yeah. The concept of who's behind me, what's going on around me. You're more observant than the regular person, more on guard, and I think it's there, but you don't realize it sometimes. It's just there.
It's almost reflexive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what's the now when you look back on it, and when someone says to you, and they may not know that you fought in Vietnam, and someone brings up the topic, how do you think about it now, almost 50 years later?
Well, the Disabled American Veterans in town here, we have a flag program. We have all the flags is flown over a battle site, and we go to schools and we present them to the kids. This flag was used here, and we give the history. And thanks to Ed Saunders, he checked out our history on the flags, and we found it to be true. We present it to kids. The biggest thing that I can get tears in my eyes, a Huntley project, the kids come down and shook our hands.
Yeah. If we would have had a different welcoming, a different homecoming, what kind of impact do you think that might have made?
I think the biggest thing happened is we couldn't get jobs, because numerous times you're turned down because you're a Vietnam vet, and that's what was real. So that hurt, that you couldn't get a job, a good paying job. I was fortunate enough, I got on the Postal Service, but the guy doing hiring was a captain in the Army Reserves. So he gave me a chance, and I used it and had a great career with him. Starting out as a carrier and moved into management and going to school and stuff like that. So I was able to get there. My brother had more of a rough time. The Veterans Administration, there was no support for our guys, and now they're finding all these Vietnam veterans coming forward for help because they never did get help. And I can't help to think if they would have helped out when they first come home, they'd have made a big difference.
Do you see us treating those who fight over in Enduring Freedom or Desert Storm or Afghanistan, all of those, are we getting better at this as far as treating our vets, or how do you, as a guy who went through it, see how we're doing now?
Yes, we're treating them better, but the public in general come along, but it was the soldiers from Vietnam, Korea that said they would never allow that to happen to our soldiers again. And they make sure that the people at the airport and all that. The public in general then started getting involved. People want to be involved in some cases, the ones that don't have their heads in the sand. But they also have the issue of there's no draft. So I question, okay, the rich kids don't have to go. It's still our middle-income kids that have to go because to pay for their college and that. I think our lawmakers, they shouldn't be a lawmaker unless they've served in the military. It's easy to sit behind a desk and say, let's go to war, but they don't want to take care of the consequences from the war. And I think about that a lot. I get pretty angry about it. How do you fix it? I don't know.
Let's go back to that. So you grew up watching these heroic movies of World War II, and there was no doubt about it. There was heroism. But then you find yourself up and down the rivers of Vietnam. It seems like a pretty different story script. Did that change your perception? It had to have changed. Being in war probably changes your perception of war, correct?
Yes, it did. As a kid, you look at these heroes on TV and, hey, I want to be a hero. And then when you actually get into something like that, the consequences of war, what happens, the devastation, the property that you destroy, stuff like that is all real. And a lot of people don't ever see that.
What was the most? Was there a stark example of that? That still, when you think of that, I think that's an interesting point. That because the war may not have happened here, we didn't necessarily see it except on TV. What were some of the things that stuck out in your mind as kind of that destruction of war that people may forget or may not have ever seen?
Well, I have two of them. One is interesting in that going down the river on each bank, the right bank was all bombed out. On the other side was a Catholic church, was white and green around it, beautiful, hadn't been touched. But on the other side was all black, burned, and you see the difference. The other thing that happened in Vietnam is the body count. Every time someone how many bodies were there? How many bodies were there? To even to the point where they'd want them to dig up places have been dug up. They said, well, are they hiding weapons there or what? If they found bodies, they want to know how many bodies was there. The gore of the war that people can't get. I mean, our highway patrols see the gore from traffic accidents, but the average citizen never even thinks about it. And that's what changes the people, your soldiers in that. You got to try to learn how to accept that, not as right or wrong, but in your mind, and how do you survive through it.
Was there a callousness to it?
You try to build something up, and different things are the key if you saw kids. But the public, they get up in the air about kids getting killed and all that. But kids kill you just as dead as an adult. And that concept really was tough. Sometimes you're overprotective, you'd back away and people get hurt because the kid did do damage. But we're always a softy towards kids, and the enemy knows that. And I think especially Americans. When you watch some of the old movies, they're always giving kids candy bars and that. Well, it never did change.
Right.
You still did it. So.
Right. Have you been back to Vietnam since?
No, I haven't. I've been invited, but I don't know whether I'm ready. Because I think about all of those Vietnamese crews that I worked with. What happened to them?
Is that what stops you? Is that kind of
more of that?
You might have to learn what happens?
Well, yeah, possibly. I think I know what happened, but I understand my brother-in-law went back. He was in Army intelligence in Vietnam. He went back here a year ago, and the first thing they want to know is anybody been to Vietnam? And when they said yes, well, then a couple guys joined the group. And then they went on telling how they beat the Americans and all that. So the only reason that war in my mind was lost was because of the politics. That there was no reason why we couldn't have won it straight out and been done with it and saved lives in my mind.
Yeah.
But that is my opinion. So, but that's the way I feel, that we can't go at things half-hearted. If you're going to go to war, you got to go and get it over with, because look how long Vietnam went.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't right. It was all politics.
When you were, did you spend 4 years? I mean, what was your total time that you spent over there?
4 years in the service. Well, 3 years, 11 months, and 12 days.
But who's counting, right?
All right. But I only spent the 1 year in Vietnam.
And what year was that?
And that was 1969 to 1970.
In what way? I imagine for different veterans, it's different how the war plays in with their life now versus. I don't think any veteran would say it doesn't play a part. What way do you know that your experiences during the Vietnam War and in the service affect you?
All the violence that there was the consequences of that violence. Mm-hmm. How do you live with it? Friends you lost, they're gone forever.
Does it change how you see things like violence in America today?
Yes, in that Americans, it seems to me like still don't understand what they have, and they keep throwing it away. Look at the changes they're doing to our nation that I question. Our forefathers set up things to, and I know there were rules, and you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. But when history books don't even carry anything in them about the wars, Vietnam, Korea, about what men and women had to put forth to survive through it and work with it. Are we losing that? Do we understand we're losing our freedoms if we don't wake up? In my mind, mm-hmm. In my opinion, I think we keep giving things up when we can't have Christmas plays at schools or not. And I don't care what religion you are. If you don't believe in that, then don't go. But there were people that did believe in it, so why can't that still happen? Isn't that what we fought for, so they could do that? When I speak a word and it's used against me, well, isn't that supposed to be part of my freedom?
Right.
And I worry about that. Or what are we becoming? And it worries me.
What did you do kind of in Vietnam as a daily survival, a coping mechanism? Because you knew you were over there. You didn't know what you were going to see next. You probably kind of knew about how long, but man, that's a long way away. How did you how do you cope day to day?
I think partly by the camaraderie between, as an advisor, I had one other advisor with me, and we were always together. Today, we're best friends. He lives in California. I live here. We call each other. You work with them. The fun times you have working with the Vietnamese. Funny things that you do, you remember going down the rivers and they shoot a grenade launcher because there's ducks up ahead in the water. They shoot a grenade launcher into the ducks, so then you know what you're going to have for dinner. Funny things like that. And thinking about home was kind of painful because you didn't know what your friends thought anymore.
Right. What was the contact? That raises an interesting question, Jimmie. What was the contact like while you were over there? What was going on over here as far as friends and family, and what were you hearing, and what kind of communication did you have back?
Initially, I had friends that wrote me, but that as they went into college and that, then it got less and less and less. And they kind of forgot you. And where did you get from your home, from your mother, your father? That was your support. So your friends kind of, they got into college, and I understand that, where they get involved in their own thing, but they really didn't understand what you were going through, and they wouldn't. I mean, they're going to college, they're working hard to make their careers and all that. What hurt is when you come home and they thought things were bad because of all of the hearsay that they had. Well, you're a Vietnam veteran, you're dangerous. And that every war has had people that come back mentally bothered with it. And I personally think everybody who goes to war is mentally bothered. You just handle it different.
Yeah.
That's why I've been involved with veterans, with the Disabled American Veterans, the VAN program we have, Holland Veterans. It's my way of giving back to my fellow veterans because I know the general public don't understand. They label us a lot of times, well, get over it. Well, guess what? You don't just get over it.
Right.
So
right. Let's talk about, these were fiberglass boats that you were on, correct? Were they were fiberglass? They were pretty lithe on their. I mean, they could move around, but they were also not a lot of cover either.
Yeah, the what they called PBRs were fiberglass boats,
Okay.
jet boats, and that was another section of the. These boats were used to haul troops, and they actually used old World War II landing craft, and they put what they call bar armor around them, put guns on them, and that to haul troops down the river. The Alpha boat that you see on the front of the boat, that was the only boat actually built for river warfare, and it would go up to 16 knots down the river, but it drug for mines. It was made partly of aluminum and bar armor, they called it, because of the rockets that they could shoot. They were the ones that were made that to take the boats up the river. We had radar in the boats, in some boats, not all boats, but the coxswain would bury his face in a screen, and at night, when you go down the rivers, you could see the fish nets along the river in the dark down the river. Some of the high technology, some of what we had a starlight scope where you could see images in the dark compared to what they have now. All you could see was, there's something moving at us. I don't know whether it's a cow, human, or what. So there were a few water buffalo that were killed because they thought they were, because you couldn't make out quite.
Right.
You just saw them walking towards you, and they aren't supposed to be there.
Right.
So there's comical things like that.
So you had water buffalo for a few meals, huh?
Well, we always had to pay for them.
Right.
Yeah, if you shot them, but it's just one of those things. Well, what do we do?
Right. Yeah.
So
what is the so not only was it getting troops into what needed to be where they needed to be, I imagine you also you were easy targets for the enemy though too, right? I mean, because you were kind of out in the middle of open water. It's kind of hard to be disguised. That had to be kind of nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it definitely is. The boats that people never get to see them, but they had a lot of firepower on them. But in a fight out in the street, the guy gets the first punch and generally wins because he's already
got the first punch in.
They had a lot of firepower. The boats did, but if you got hit, somebody got hurt. But the other boats then had a lot of firepower to get in return. So those were you just knew about that. That's the way it was. So
right. When you got into a situation like that, you're on water. You're kind of out where I'm guessing heavy forestation in some places.
In some places,
they've got to. They're hiding a little better. Was that a pretty vulnerable position? I mean, anytime you're taking fire, I'm sure you feel vulnerable. But was when you're on the water like that, that seems like you would feel even more vulnerable because where do you go to take cover and how do you do it?
You're more aware. You just know that you're going to have to respond. And what they used is caves that they would dig up towards the bank of the rivers, and they would stick their heads out of the caves and fire rockets at you and so on. But we had a lot of firepower to return. But that first punch, like you were always trained as a kid, your dad told you, if somebody says hit him, and the fight will be over.
Right.
It's always that first punch.
Right. You got one good.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But then there was also times we hauled people from villages from one to another because they were in a bad area where you got to show that kindness towards people. And again, a lot of Americans don't feel that way about the Vietnamese. But I got to work on the other side. I understood how they had to live, and they had the enemy in their village, and they had to treat them right, and the same as when we showed up. So we knew they were in real position that it hurt. But the children, the babies, they're people, and that. So that being an advisor, that gave you that you got to learn that, hey, these are real people, folks.
Right.
And that, where the regular grunt, all he saw was his buddies getting wounded or killed and no real contact with them.
Right.
And people don't understand. When a kid kills you, you're just as dead as when an adult does.
Yeah.
And that those concepts are hard to absorb.
Right. What do you wish? I mean, looking back, let's talk. Let's take this interview today as a valuable for more than just today. So when people look back and they wonder about Vietnam, because neither you nor I are here anymore to talk about that, what do you hope they remember or know about Vietnam and the vets who served?
I unfortunately don't think they'll remember us. I mean, you look at the Korean veterans, you don't hear much about Korean veterans. And they kind of got it caught just like we did. The news media misused it, misadvertised it. They showed what Americans did, but they never showed what the Vietnamese done. It was always on the Americans. I don't know how history will report it. Right now, what I understand is a little burp in maybe the history book, and that's it. They don't have it that over 58,000 guys died over there, and millions who were wounded and mutilated, and mentally and physically. And I don't know. I think it'll just be a little blurb in the history books, if anything, when it's all said and done. I think World War II, they were great Americans, and those same Americans didn't support the Vietnam soldiers. In fact, I remember trying to get into the American Legion, and they let me be a member, but they didn't really want me there because they didn't understand we were fighting as hard as they were.
Right.
A war is a war, no matter how big or little. And I still feel like we don't finish things, then it just goes on and on.
Right.
So I have no animosity or hatred. I just think about the guys that put their lives out there and they've been ignored.
Yeah. Do you think it's getting any better? Are people beginning to recognize it, or is it still pretty forgotten?
Well, the general public are more involved, but I think it's because of the Wounded Warriors, the VFW, the Disabled American Veterans, trying to keep the light going. As soon as the war starts going down politically, you quit hearing. They quit helping the veterans as much. They're not as open. We'll look at this. Agent Orange is a good example. They knew the first approach of Agent Orange was to get rid of and defoliage the jungles so they couldn't ambush us as easy. Well, then they found out because we're drinking the water and all that then that's bad for your health. It's like the atomic bomb. Then they didn't want to live up to the results of those weapons. And they did the same thing. World War II, atomic bombs, Agent Orange, all of the problems there. A lot of guys died that may not have if they would have acknowledged it up front instead of playing politics with it. That bothers me more than anything. That I think our congressmen, America's losing it. Every one of them should have to serve in the military before they can become a congressman, in my mind.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't been to war, then how do you know what it's like?
Yeah.
And that on paper, 10 killed. That's all they see is on the paper, 10 killed. But they don't see the body there or the results of it. So how do we get the public to realize that? The Veterans Administration now is struggling because of politics, in my mind. I think the groundwork people, the nurses and doctors are trying to do the right thing, but the administrators and all that play games. I mean, they don't take care of the veterans like they should be taken care of.
Yeah. You know, you said they don't understand what war is like. So let's say that you have a chance, we'll play hypothetical here, to address Congress, and they say, okay, we're considering war. What would you tell them? What is that war like?
I think I'd ask them, are you prepared to take care of the consequences of not only our soldiers and sailors, but how are you interacting with the public? Because it seems to me like our senators and lawmakers got it all backwards. They forgot why they're up there, that they're supposed to be supporting all the people of America, not just certain groups and so forth. If we're going to go to war, if we have to do it for right reasons, then they need to do it. It's like your dad probably told you that you get in a fist fight, you best be putting your dukes up, because if you don't, you're going to get injured. This playing with politics while you're in a war is, to me, it's destroying us.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you, let's go back to just an average, I think one of the things that we lose is we compress time when we look back at the war, and it had, 66, maybe like 67 or 68. But tell me just kind of an average day. What was an average day for you like in the war?
A lot of boredom.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's an excellent question, because people don't understand that you're not at war all the time. But then they don't understand 120-degree weather in the rain, or 110 degrees in the rain. You're wet, the bugs, the snakes, the food. You're miserable.
How do you survive bugs, snakes, and what was the food like? How did you cope with those things?
It was an adventure, because after I become an advisor, then we tend to eat more Vietnamese food, and we'd go to the villages and buy it, and so on. When I was with Americans, we used our sea rations. We'd use them. We'd give them to kids, or we'd get to families that needed food. We'd use it as rewards. My boat captains, I bought Salem cigarettes for them, because they like menthol cigarettes, like that. But most of the time, it's boredom. When's something else going to happen? And you're waiting, and you're waiting. You're miserable because of weather.
So do you just sit and wait, or is there anything to? I just think of do you sit and wait, or what do you do?
Well, you interact with each other, your own comrades, as they say, doing that, and you talked a lot about home, wondering what they're doing about home. But then you found out home wasn't on your side, and it really made things difficult. Because, you wonder what's happening back home. There was certain music they wouldn't play over the radios in Vietnam that they played here, and that. So you always thought about home, mm-hmm. And you thought about the kids you went to school with and all that, and not realizing how much you had changed.
What do you think, when you got home, what did people say to you changed about you?
I'm not sure how they read me. Almost entirely, if you were a Vietnam veteran, you were labeled. Here's somebody that's drug crazed, going to go off the handle at any time. My closest friends that I went to school with, they went on and went to college. Well, here I come home from the service, having a hard time finding a job, and because I was a Vietnam vet, working at it, their wives didn't necessarily want me to associate with their husbands. So you got labeled that wasn't right. I mean, you were a soldier. I expected Montana to be just like when my uncles and dad come home. They were supported. They got to go out and get jobs they wanted and so on, and that wasn't it. Vietnam, you were labeled. I remember going to college at Eastern. I had a history teacher from Iran, and he was more compassionate about the Vietnam vets that were in his classes than the college as a whole.
Why?
I think because he come from a country that's always been at war, that he understood that he didn't always have control of what was going on, and the results of it. And that's where so many people don't understand the results and why you give an 18-year-old a gun and his friend gets killed. What do you think an 18-year-old's going to do?
Amen.
And it's stuff you don't forget. And the only way you can heal is you hope you can come home, get a good job, take care of your family, and move on. World War II veterans, the great generation, they come home, they didn't want to talk about it and all that. But then when you look at history, they had the same problems that every war does, between drugs, killings, things that weren't supposed to happen. But you give an 18-year-old a gun and his friend gets killed, what do you think he's going to do? How do you think he's going to react emotionally?
How would you describe your emotions now looking back on it? How do you feel about the war and what you experienced? How would you characterize those?
Trying to explain to people what happened. Like I said, my lieutenant told me, if you get a chance to talk about it with people. But trying to get them to understand that it isn't all just war. It's the misery that goes with it. Yes, the shooting and killing and all that is terrible. But then the suffering you do just on an everyday, 110 degrees, bugs, water, you're just miserable in that. And I guess that's why they want young guys in the service.
Right, because us old ones would...
Yeah, you couldn't do it. But don't label us.
Yeah.
We're labeled baby killers, all that. I did my job. And I have nothing that I'm ashamed that I done. The war part, it was bad. And survival, you have to learn to survive, because if you didn't, you didn't.
And by that, I mean you have to shoot, you have to fight.
You have to return fire, you have to be involved. Not only for yourself, but your buddies.
Yeah. Because
a loose link can cause the rest of them to be injured. So, and then I had a lot of compassion for the people themselves, the Vietnamese. I mean, you look at it, some of them never knew anything other than war. All their lives they've been at war. And that's terrible. We'd go over there a year or 2 years and come home, and we're out of the war. Only we found coming home from Vietnam, we come home to a different war that they didn't want us to. Yeah. And that made going to school tough. Even professors made it tough.
Yeah.
And that was disappointing to me, especially in Montana, because usually western states have always been patriotic. Right. And it was different.
Tell me, let's talk a little bit about how did you fight? We've got mosquito. We joke about having mosquitoes in Montana, but it's nothing like being in the jungle. How did you survive? We have rattlesnakes, but we don't have snakes swimming in rivers and hanging off trees. How did you survive the elements and then just monsoon-like rains?
Well, like so I said, just miserable. You kind of just hunkered down, but you found out certain things that, like at night, you didn't jump in the river and take a bath. Because once you got your own perspiration off of you, the mosquitoes, liked you better. It was like putting tenderizer on you. You learned that your own body had protections that build up to it. You learned the heat was so bad that you could take a poncho liner and put it over the bow of the boat, and it would just stretch out like spaghetti from the heat. It would be so hot. The heat was terrible, but your uniforms were white from sweating all the time. You always worried about the funguses and that they were there. But you looked around, hey, everybody's in the same boat.
Literally with you, right?
Yeah. And you just learned to put up, you learned that the mosquito repellent they gave you worked really well, but as soon as you put it on and grabbed your M16, it was made of plastic. Well, that mosquito repellent would actually cause the plastic to melt or get sticky.
Really?
So you're sitting there wondering, and I'm putting this on my skin, and the funny things that happened. The little Vietnamese, you have 6 boats beached up in the jungle, and he's throwing percussion grenades in the water so zappers can't hook a mine to you. Well, he decides to throw one from the outside boat all across all 7 boats. I was on the 7th boat. I heard the explosion. I looked up, and all I saw stuff coming at me. And I just said a word, and just pulled my poncho liner on me. It wouldn't stop any shrapnel or anything, but it was just mud.
Right.
So this little Vietnamese, you don't do that anymore,
Right.
Those are what we call comical. Or you go visit, when we went to Cambodia, we visited a village afterwards, and all the sailors wanted going to the bar in the girly place. And so 2 advisors, we sat out and drank coffee, waiting for them to all get done with their drinking and whatever. And the boat captain comes in and says, your turn. You start laughing. No, not our turn. And I know you probably had to, but those are things you remembered.
Right.
That were just funny to happen. Right. Or was with a bunch of Koreans one time, and we were downtown Saigon. And this Korean reaches on his belt, pulls off a hand grenade, and throws it in a Jeep with a bunch of soldiers in it. They all bailed out. Well, he never pulled the pin. We'd call that fun. I mean,
right, right, yeah,
comical,
right. I mean, it's something
to break the monotony, and the people, watching the people work hard. A woman have a baby and she'd be out in the rice field the next morning working, and they were strong people. They admired a lot. They worked hard, and they suffered a lot too.
Yeah. When you were, you mentioned even some of the things like that you learned things like to trade for Vietnamese food. What did you? I understand that war teaches a lot of misery and or how to do really good mosquito repellent, but what did you, as far as food or culture, were there things that were new and enjoyable?
Well, growing up in Montana, you had beef and potatoes.
Right. Yep.
Well, then you went to the sea rations that the government issued, and some of those still had dates on them from World War II. And you kind of wonder what it was doing to your bodies if you got hold of them. The living off the land is what we'd pull boats over and buy bananas off a boat. We'd see a boat coming down that had Coke on it, and we'd wave the boat down and buy Coke from that. And then our ice boat would be coming down. You go in, you push all this sawdust off ice, and you bought your ice for your Coke, that. You never did anything as a routine because you set yourself up.
Right.
You did boat searches. You stopped boats to make sure that they weren't hauling weapons and so on, and that was always an adventure.
Right.
The one deal, they had a poisonous snake tacked to the floor of their boat with a basket over it. So when you pick the basket up, you always pull it towards you. So whatever was there, you could see over it instead of it getting you. I did the same thing as a kid stacking hay. You always pull the bale towards you in case a rattlesnake curled up underneath that. So you had the bale between him and the snake. Things like that you learned. And bananas. First time I bought a banana, it was green, green, green. And I put it up waiting for it to turn yellow. And I found out, no, it's ripe when it's green. It's a different kind. So it was interesting. It was listening to the people and talking to. I had one boat captain was Catholic, and part of his crews were Buddhists. They all had a different angle, just like Americans.
Right. Amazing, huh?
Yeah. And that was rewarding, and just to be able to learn another culture, why they did things the way they did, And why do people get upset over cultural things that don't mean nothing? I mean, to you as an individual, if you're not Catholic, then you're not Catholic. But why should I attack a Catholic? You know, the educational part of it, the Vietnamese we had on the boat, a lot of them were better educated than the Army, ARVN soldier. They came from families that had more money, and a lot of them had some education. So, and those are the things. And just like the U.S., we have, well, the melting pot, like they say. But why do we get angry at each other like that? If you're part of the melting pot, you're part of it.
Right, right. What did you said, you found yourself when you're over there during these moments of boredom, a long way away, you found yourself missing certain things. What did you miss about home?
I think your family first. You always miss your family. And thinking, well, what are my friends doing back home? And once in a while you get a letter, oh, we were dancing.
Right. You miss that.
And you're sitting there, okay, somebody's having fun, You always wanted to make sure that I did the right things, that my family would always be proud of me, that I believed in God, and that you had to, in my mind, to get through all that. And try not to be so angry about everything that you couldn't get over it.
Yeah.
Because then that affects your whole life from then on.
Are you angry today about it?
Some parts of it. When I see what goes on overseas, we're sending special forces in. We don't have enough people in the armed forces, so these guys are doing 3, 4, 5 stretches over there. What does the people think is happening to the mind? Because no matter if you're in war and the things you see just don't go away. And if you keep doing it, it's just like if you're on drugs. You keep taking it, it eventually kills you, or you can't get over it. Well, that's what we're doing to the soldiers and sailors' minds. We keep sending them over there because we don't have the armed forces that we need.
Yeah.
In my mind, that we can't keep sending the same guy out there. I mean, look at a boxer. You keep sending him out in the ring, pretty soon he gets punch drunk.
Yeah.
Because he keeps getting hit in the head.
Yeah.
And we're doing that to our soldiers now. Our volunteer army is good to a point, but if we really get in trouble, we're going to be in trouble because we're not going to have enough armed forces to protect ourselves.
Right.
In my mind.
Yeah, that's right. What else? What have I missed that you hope people understand about Vietnam, either today or going forward?
Well, the reputation that the Vietnam veterans got in general, baby killers, drug addicts, they missed the mark. All the majority of the veterans want to do is come home, go to school, have careers, and not be labeled. If you don't want us to come back messed up, then don't send us. Because no matter when you go or what you do, if you're in combat, the things you see, the things you don't like, like counting bodies, dead bodies, you got to count bodies because the papers want to know how many Cong you killed, and that's what your warmongers wanted, your leaders. It was like you were being graded. Well, you didn't kill enough people. Well, why? People got to pay attention. They got to be involved, and they got to vote. You can't just sit and not be involved with your nation if you wanted to succeed and actually survive. That's
a pretty good message.
So it's because you look at it. It seems like we're losing more and more rights all the time.
Yes. Is there anything else that I've missed?
Just hoping the public really pays attention, don't bury their heads in the sand, that if you're going to go to war, there's a price to pay. And when it's over, you can't forget the guys that went. You can't forget their parents and families.
Yeah.
Because they paid the ultimate prices. And even if they didn't get killed and they come back and they're messed up, their families suffer the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Did your family, do you think, I mean, you talked about brothers who had a harder time. What was the toll on your family, either the one that you had or your extended family to brothers?
I know for a fact that my one brother was in the 4th Infantry. He had troubles all his life after Vietnam. He never could get it. He didn't get the help that he needed to get over it. And it affected him through 2 marriages, drinking, the post-traumatic stress. You think about it all the time. And even, people say, yeah, it'll go away. It never does. It's there. My wife, she sees me watching the John Wayne War movie, and I still dream.
Right.
It never goes away. It's always there. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It's just that was part of my experience.
Right.
You got to learn to live with it. You got to learn to use it. Hoping that, remember, veterans are skilled people. When they can fly $1 million planes, weaponry, electronics, but when they come home, they can't get a job because, you don't have no experience. Well, that experience that you got in the service, especially under combat conditions and that, you can't put a value on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, do we might need your training? Well, yeah, but you find a lot of them, hey, if you give them the chance, they'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Did you find when it came to out in the workforce, how do you think that experience in Vietnam helped?
It didn't. It was almost like as soon as I knew you had served in Vietnam, it went from here at the interview down to the bottom. That, well, we're not so sure. Yeah, we'll call you. And they would ask you what experiences you had. Well, all the experiences. I worked on farms when I was a kid. I can run heavy equipment. I run the boats, weaponry, all stuff that you had to have a brain or two.
Right.
But and I realized during Vietnam, there at the lake, they started dumping everybody out of the service. So there was a lot of people out looking for jobs. But it just seemed like, I know for a fact, a big outfit here in Billings, I went to an interview. There was two of us had Vietnam experience. There was about 30 people in the class. A guy in a tie and a coat come in and pulled us out and told us that he couldn't hire us. And today he could have got sued, but he just told us to. And so we didn't have the interview. And it was a prominent business, national business. But it's, you kept going and asking and trying to get jobs and that, and nobody wanted to. Yeah, they might let you go and scrub the floors, but they didn't look at you as, well, here's a guy who flew $1 million helicopter or took bombs apart, that he had skills that you can take and hone, and he's going to be reliable. Right.
Yeah, who served for years.
Yeah, that knows the value of doing a good job and accomplishing it with good results. So, and the colleges, I guess, disappointed me the most because we had professors that never left town, and they're telling me what Vietnam was like, and not supporting the troops at all. And it used to, during World War II, every American supported our troops. What happened? Why did we lose all that?
Yeah. Yeah, because you could have given them a much different view, I imagine, of Vietnam, too.
Sure. I gave a view. You had heard the guys that they call the Vietnamese slopeheads. They did not like them because the people they worked with, the ARVN soldiers and that, weren't reliable. The ones I worked with, the boat and that, were reliable. They wanted to learn. So I got a different side than what the regular ARVN Army. But you look at the ARVN Army, uneducated, just on survival mode, and that's all they were. And they were not in a hurry. You heard of Indian time, that when they get there, that's when they're supposed to be there. Well, the Vietnamese had a similar idea. Well, when we get there, that's when we were supposed to have been there.
Right.
So you always had to factor that in. Americans, we got to be there at 7 in the morning. You better be there at 7 in the morning. Well, they didn't play that game. So understanding others' cultures is the most important thing that we all need. Why did they do that? Well, why don't you find out? I took Indian studies. It was neat because then it helped me understand, well, that's why they do that.
Right. Gave you perspective.
Yeah.
You're not your story may not be completely necessarily. I don't think it's solely unique. But do you think a lot of people came back and they didn't want to? I mean, it seems like after you've had those kind of experiences, you can go one of two ways with it. Either you can shut down or you can open up and try to explain it. It seems like you went one way. Why did you go one way and other people didn't go that way?
I thank that lieutenant that told me, somebody wants to know about it, talk about it. Instead of shoving it down and not sharing what's going on. And I never have shared the goriest gore part of things in the naturally. I didn't take pictures of dead bodies. I didn't cut ears off, stuff like that. I did my job. I tried to train people. I like people. In that concept, you always have the kid in classes, did you ever kill anybody?
Right. How do you answer that one?
It's hard to answer that one, especially if you're coming from a kid. And most times, you think that's really important? How do you,
right.
Tell me? Because every kid, I remember when I was a kid and my uncles were all soldiers, I wanted to know all about it too.
Right.
Because the concept, the problem I have with our kids today are these games they play. They're violent. And are they making themselves to where they don't care about if there's a dead body?
Right.
And that worries me. But mostly
because you saw the consequences of what that dead body meant.
Right.
Whether it was on the Viet Cong or on the American
side. Yeah, it didn't matter which side it was. The smell, the gore of it. Those are the things you never forget. Now, I talk to kids about babies, Vietnamese babies, Vietnamese people, what they eat, how they worked out in the rice fields. And that's what most kids ask. Well, how hot was it over there, or something like that. But there's always that kid that wants to know about the war part. And that, and you kind of just smile and tell them that it's just something war is war, and it's hard to talk about that kind of stuff like that, but it's real. So I don't blame kids for that, because when as a kid, you made heroes of all your John Waynes and all that kind of stuff. But they don't realize if you learn how to fight a war, what the consequences are.
Yeah. Do you? Is that a part that's lacking in our school curriculum? I mean, how do you quantify the consequences?
I think it's a lack of the teachers giving you the truth. I had a 5th grade teacher. Her brother was in World War II in the tank infantry in Africa. And she told the class the stories that his tank got blown up. Everybody in it was killed but him, and he was wounded severely. And he had to spend, I can't remember how many days, 3-4 days in that hot tank in the desert. with all those dead bodies. And she shared that. And that sometimes don't make a soldier is a hero, but the consequences is what it does to that individual from being in a war. It steals your mind. It injures you. You don't get over it.
Right.
Now, there's some hardcore people that don't have any conscience. And like I've always been told, there's never anybody that's not scared. But I met guys that they're just hardcore.
Right.
And when you look at our prison system, you can see that.
Sure.
It's a mental thing that you have to accept. So,
but most of your fellow soldiers, fellow sailors over there, you could sense that it got to them, or that it. I mean, you would toughen yourself, but they weren't as hardcore.
No, I think the boat guys were hardcore. I mean, they had conscience, but they knew they couldn't bend under it because their life was in that hands. You had to keep yourself prepared. We talked about it with each other. When you get your own killed, what it does to your mind is really tough.
How would those conversations go? I mean, what would you say to each other? What could you say to each other?
Sometimes you try to make a joke about it. I didn't see that coming. Sometimes all you did is closed your eyes and would walk away. You didn't want to see what happened. When they got wounded, you'd make fun of each other. Well, now what'd you do? It was your way of surviving in your mind, I think, so you could cope with it, because you wonder, how can one human do this to another human?
Right.
And so you always joked about funny things that would happen.
Right.
I remember an advisor and I were going down the river in the middle of the night, and about Christmas. We were sitting on the bow of the boat singing Christmas songs. At night. It was pitch dark.
In Vietnam.
Yeah. And things like that, or we would get off a boat and we'd be out in the middle of nowhere. We'd get out and we'd find a village. We'd get on a bus. And that's because you felt like you were tough.
Right.
Nobody's going to mess with you. Well, wrong.
Right.
But that's the way your mind, that's how you had to cope with it. That you were the roughest person there. That
no one's going to mess with you.
Nobody, you mess with me, you're going to wish you hadn't.
Yeah, that's a hard mindset then to slip out of when you come back.
Yeah, it is. But I think some of the stuff you see, your compassion in my heart was really strong when I'd see people get hurt. Kids, women, villagers, and your friends, that you wondered how, why them.
Right.
And you always have that, I think, how comes I come back and he didn't? That's, I think, always there, planted there.
Is that still there right now?
Oh, yeah. You think of the guys, they wonder, well, why did that happen?
How do you reconcile that?
I don't know that I've ever been able to, except for thinking that it was in a good Lord's hands. Mm-hmm. That it wasn't my turn, and we've done that a lot. It wasn't my turn.
Yeah.
And trying to cope like that, but the gore that goes with war is I still have flashbacks, and I've seen some gory things that didn't bother me, but the biggest thing that bothered me one time was a body bag. In the bright sun, we were putting it on the boat, and the blood had come out on a dark green body bag, mm-hmm. and I have flashbacks of that all the time.
Hmm. So it's not just one thing. It's something.
Just something that catches you off guard.
The unexpected.
Yeah, and it's war is terrible. I mean, that's absolutely terrible.
Did you also, I imagine there was something existential about it. I mean, you're singing Christmas carols on a boat during Christmas. You have to wonder, how did I get from Laurel, Montana to here?
Well, sometimes, this sounds terrible maybe,
No?
but it was exciting to be in the service. I was elite. I was on these river patrol boats, and there aren't a lot of us.
Yeah, it's very few.
Yeah, and I was something elite. I worked with people. I survived, and you wonder, well, how comes I survived and they didn't? But at the same time, I felt like I did it. You know, I think every kid sometime in their life, they have doubt about themselves. Mm-hmm. What am I going to make of myself? How am I going to survive, you know? But this here was life and death, and it was just Jim Kerr that I had to take care of and do things right. And Jim did it.
It's a great story.
Yeah, that you were able to get through it. Yeah, you had bad times, just like when Dad spanked you.
Right.
When you were a kid, you still remember that spanking.
Right.
But at the same time, it was rewarding in a lot of ways, and terrible in other ways.
Yeah.
But people, I've always liked people, and I got to work with people under the strangest conditions that they weren't Americans.
Right.
And it was really neat to realize that people all over the world have the same things that they want in their lives as we do. Just because their skin's different or they eat different food than we do, they're not bad people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, on behalf of the Gazette and on behalf of I think Montana and kind of leading one of these projects, I just want to say thank you for your service and thank you for doing what you did.
And thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing your stories.